This is Criteria.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Criteria. I'm Thomas Miras, and I'm here with my co-host James Majewski. Hello, James.
Hello, Thomas.
And we're here to discuss a British film, the 1996 movie Secrets and Lies, directed by Mike Leigh. Kind of an appropriate for the Thanksgiving season film, in my opinion, because it's all about a big family get-together, even a kind of reunion. A comedy drama, very interesting, kind of just family drama. We've got our returning guest with us today that first was here with us to discuss a book that he had written, Popcorn with the Pope, a book about the Vatican film list published by Word on Fire. And then he came on to discuss, The Elephant Man by David Lynch. And now he's here to discuss Secrets and Lies. And that is Andrew Petiprin, who runs the Space Solvi Institute and comments on all kinds of cultural and civilizational and cinematic matters. Welcome back, Andrew.
Glad to be back with you guys. Thanks for inviting me.
I like that. Cultural, civilizational, and cinematic. CCC.
Exactly.
I mean, what else is there?
Yeah. The three categories of being. Aristotle could have just knocked it down from 10 to 3, you know. All right. So Mike Leigh is a director we haven't talked about before. We haven't even talked about that many English films, to my recollection. Now, I first saw this film when Lincoln Center here in New York City did a retrospective of Mike Leigh's films with him present for Q&As at some of them, including the showing of Secrets and Lies that I saw. And I don't remember, but I might have gone and seen that film in particular because you had covered it in a shorter segment on the series on film that you had been doing on the Word on Fire YouTube channel back then, Andrew. So that's why I thought of having you on. So this presumably is a film dear to your heart in some way.
Yeah, it is. I saw it back in the 90s, I think, when it first came out, when I was kind of a teenage cinephile. I definitely did not see it at the movie theater, but I believe I saw it on home video at some point in the late 90s or so, not long after it came out. And it really struck me even then. And I've seen it a couple more times, maybe 3-4 more times. Probably 4 more times now since I watched it again in preparation for talking to the two of you. And I find it just an extremely rich film where every scene has me really emotionally wrought. I mean, I feel kind of as the story progresses, I am deeply invested in the characters and also kind of feeling myself, just all kinds of emotions about family. Obviously Mike Leigh, the idea behind the film was like with, I think, most of his films, although I'm not a Mike Leigh aficionado. He's not one of the directors that I really know, whose total body of work that I know, but I love this particular film. And I know that he really set out to make a movie about adoption because there were people in his own family who had been adopted or who had adopted or something like that. And so he just began kind of turning in his mind all the different things related to adoption. And he ended up deciding to make the film, as you guys know, not about people who gave up children for adoption and also people who adopted, although we don't see the people who adopted in the movie. It's really more about the child and a woman who gave up a child for adoption. And as you said, James, Thomas, when I made that short, I think it's about 20 minutes long. I made a film series for Word on Fire called Watch With Me, and I made one that was about adoption, and I paired this film, Secrets and Lies, with Wes Anderson's The Royal Tenenbaums, and also the film Juno, that all deal with the topic of adoption. And I don't know. I think that Secrets and Lies, as far as it goes, might be just really one of the great films of the late 20th century, and particularly dealing with this issue of adoption in all kinds of different ways.
Yeah, perhaps at this moment I can just jump in to give a quick synopsis for the film. Please, yeah. So the film follows a few different characters, but I'd say probably the two main ones are a young woman, an optometrist. Her name's Hortense, and she was given up for adoption as a child. and she's seeking her birth mother. She finds her birth mother, who is another central character, Cynthia Purley. She's a very working class, kind of Cockney London woman, a single mother to her own daughter, Roxanne. The wrinkle is that Hortense is black and Cynthia is white. And so right away, it's very clear just how different these two people are and the different backgrounds they have. There's a class difference, an education difference. There's all sorts of things. But really, the film sort of hinges around their relationship and how that begins to affect not only the two of them, but then the extended Purley family as well. Another major character is Cynthia's brother and his wife.
Morris.
Morris. He and his wife, they cannot have children, so they don't have any children of their own. And then also Cynthia's other daughter, Roxanne, the half-sister of Hortense. And Roxanne is sort of a chip on her shoulder young lady whose 21st birthday party really becomes the site of many secrets and lies being coming to the surface. And so anyway, it is a film about adoption, but it's also more broadly really about family. All of these relationships are fraught in one way or another between husband and wife, between mother and daughter, brother and sister. There's a lot to be said about death and the loss of one's parents. Several of the characters sort of reflect on their relationships with their deceased mother or father. And the film opens with the funeral of Hortense's adopted parents. We're never told how they die, but they seem to have died very suddenly, perhaps tragically. And the whole extended family is there together at the burial, singing a hymn.
Yeah.
And it's a very striking way to begin the film, but it's also the one and only time where we really get any sense of the rest of Hortense's adopted family. We see a lot of faces. We can imagine who these people are: uncles, aunts, cousins. But then virtually the whole rest of the film, except for perhaps one scene, really centers around the Purley family and Hortense's sort of coming into that. I loved this movie. I don't know that I've seen any Mike Leigh films before this one. But this was my first time encountering the film, and I have to thank you, Andrew, because I too was just sort of at the edge of my seat through it's not a short film. It's almost 2.5 hours long, but it goes by like that. And it's partly because every scene, like you said, Andrew, is just a banger. So rich and tight, so much happening beneath the surface in these interactions, so much drama. I really was quite blown away. So thank you for that. Yes.
Yeah, I think if I could just jump in and say, I think it's pertinent real quick, James, and maybe Thomas, you want to respond to that too. But I think that the thing that you just said there, James, about how there's so much beneath the surface is really significant to this film. And I know we're going to get into this, but the way that Mike Leigh makes his movies is he does it by working directly with the individual actors and creating the characters with them, basically without a script. And then the script develops as the character is built. And he has said in multiple interviews that he wants the character to come across to the audience like you're just looking at the tip of the iceberg, and because the actors actually have built the character beneath the water as well. And that is, I do think, why there's such power in those performances. And it really, I was saying this to my wife last night as I was just kind of talking about the film in preparation for today, that when you watch a movie like Secrets and Lies, and there are other directors who have the same kind of effect in different ways, but it just really is a different kind of experience. I mean, it's like watching a Terrence Malick film or something. It's just not like watching other kinds of movies. It's just not your typical entertainment. I mean, it is just an emotional experience. It is a real work of art.
Yeah, I think the comparison between Mike Leigh and Malick is an apt one, because both of these directors, while very different stylistically, each so clearly has a very strong vision for what he's trying to accomplish and knows the sort of means by which to do so. And so it's interesting that both use improvisation very heavily, if not very differently. I think that in the case of Malick, the improvisational quality is obviously just with a view toward gathering as much material as he can that he can then shape and form the film in the edit afterward. Whereas here, the improvisation really seems to be with a view toward really serving the actor's work. So people talk about an actor's director, and that kind of gets bandied about. I've heard Malick described in that way. But I think that Mike Leigh really is an actor's director par excellence, because here is someone who truly respects the acting craft and its potential to generate something, and not just to sort of interpret or represent, but really to be an active part in the creation of the work. I kind of view this actually as a kind of high watermark of a particular approach to acting, and a particular respect for acting, really, that I think was kind of common, or more common in the 80s and 90s than it is now. I don't know exactly what changed, but this really does seem to be like bread and butter acting on display, and it's why these scenes are so explosive. I mean, due credit needs to be given to Mike Leigh as well for what ultimately is shaped coming out of that improvisational work. There's real writing that's done, and these are tight scenes that work well on the page as well. But knowing sort of how he comes to that, it seems to be with great respect to the actor.
So, I mean, for the viewer, what that sort of translates into in terms of experience is not only sort of like nuanced and expressive acting, but a certain, what I would describe as a certain kind of like rich presence that you feel of the characters. And you mentioned this idea of like things below the surface, and that is a lot of it. I mean, that's basically what it amounts to. But what you get is a certain sense of reality. My understanding is the part of his process is kind of to get more detailed about it is like working with the actors one-on-one, developing their character through improvisation and research, because he often will select kind of like a milieu that he wants the film to be set in, a certain class, a certain ethnicity. He's got a couple of different of those in this film, obviously. And so they'll be developing this character. Then he'll start putting the actors together, and the characters continue to develop, bouncing off each other. And this is a several months long process, potentially, of improvisatory rehearsals. But then they rehearse a lot on location, actually. And so they're rehearsing in the spaces that these characters are living in. And so what you get is something that feels very real, but not in the same way that like neorealism does.
Sure.
Like very, very real, very crafted, in a sense, perhaps larger than life, but not in a way that feels like you're watching life somehow at the same time.
Yeah, and I think in addition to the way he works with actors, the way he uses the camera also obviously creates this effect. One of the most famous scenes in the movie is the 8-minute scene in the cafe, in the diner, between Hortense and Cynthia, when they meet each other for the first time, and some of the secrets and lies begin to come out, where Hortense presents Cynthia these documents that are true, that contain facts about her identity, that she is in fact Cynthia's daughter, and that Cynthia gave her up for adoption when she was 16 years old. And I mean, it is just so, again, just the epitome of that kind of emotionally charged scene. But something really interesting about that scene, if you watch it again, is although Mike Leigh did shoot some reverse shots, where you can sort of, the characters can see each other from each other's perspective and that sort of thing. He didn't end up using them. So if you watch that scene again, it is one shot, it is one straight on camera shot that is 1 8-minute take. And apparently I guess they did about 4 takes of that. But that all of that was so deeply ingrained in those characters. They had rehearsed it over and over and over again, that by the time they sat down in that booth, and it's really striking because it's kind of unusual when you look at it at first, because they're sitting on the same side of the booth and they are, and ostensibly, I think because they're going to look at some papers together, but that is what helps achieve the effect, that they're both sitting on the same side, kind of talking to each other by turning their heads like this, and we're looking straight at them the whole time. It is really hardly like anything I've seen in another movie.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to follow up and say there are a number of other scenes in the film that are like that, where it's almost like a kind of for Mike Leigh, it's almost a kind of like moral duty for how he's working with these actors, and then what do I do with the camera then, so that this doesn't come across as, I'm just sort of trying to evoke something or show something or whatever. I mean, he's really sort of like trying to use the cameras so that these people he's created are just on display for us, so that we can see them.
It's faces too. I mean, if you think of what images you remember from this movie, it's likely going to be a relatively close-up shot of somebody's face, or maybe more than one person's face in the frame, like you just described. He worked for a long time with cinematographer Dick Pope. They had this particular style they worked on together, and Pope, I think, died before Mike Leigh's most recent film was released. But it's very much the human face, and it's not a movie where you think of fancy camera moves or sort of like unusual angles for the most part or anything like that. It's really focused on the camera kind of, you don't notice it as much, but there is just a certain way of highlighting the face that is very effective.
Yeah. But, it's still very artfully done,
right?
Very intentionally done. But yes, it doesn't draw focus. And again, seems to be very much in service to what the actor is doing. There's this term kitchen sink drama, and this very much, feels like that. So many of the scenes are just between two people. Not always. There are some exceptions to that, but a lot of the time it's two characters having a conversation about something, and oftentimes what's being discussed can be so much more than just what's being discussed. So there's so much subtext. And this is something that I think is, again, very characteristic of this style of storytelling, characteristic of the kitchen sink drama in general. But it's something that, with the questions that the characters ask, with the things that they comment on, there's this subtextual reality of what's really being said or alluded to. And it works not just aesthetically, but also thematically, given that this is a film about secrets and lies and what sort of exists beneath the surface inside of our family relationships.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's pretty rare. And where they exist, I think they're kind of contrived. I'm sort of blanking at the moment to try and remember, and maybe because there aren't that many, but trying to remember kind of anything like a movie like Secrets and Lies in this kitchen sink kind of way. Because, as you say, James, I mean, we get to know these characters and we do feel like we get them deeply at the end. And yet at the same time, I was going back and thinking about the character of Roxanne, where like what is wrong with her? We meet her at the beginning, and I think almost the first line she says to her mother in the first conversation they're having is she actually says, "I never asked to be born." And this is kind of this recurring idea of like, why were any of these people born? And maybe we'll get to the fact that there are 3 significant conversations in the film about contraception.
Yes.
But to stick with Roxanne for a second, she's miserable. She's going nowhere. And, we get this sense that her mother has been very bad to her in some respects, but we don't really know we don't know exactly what's happened. You know, was she abusive at some point? Was she, you know, what exactly was it? We don't know. Again, that's the stuff that's under the surface. And
her mother's extremely neurotic and insecure. We can say that.
And probably an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's the thing. Nowadays, in a lot of filmmaking, there's this like temptation that filmmakers can't resist, that they have to tell you more backstory. Like they think it won't make sense if we don't know, you know, so they're going to give us some flashback scene where Cynthia slapped her daughter around or like something like that.
Right.
But no, Mike Leigh's not going to do that, because this is about right here. Yes. This is about, and this, in this sense, it's like a play, right? I mean, it's like, you know, we're going to have this sort of universal experience by looking at 2 months basically in the life of this one family whose whole world is overturned by the introduction of someone into it that they never thought they would meet.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of restraint is present not just with respect to the characters, but even with respect to the plot. I mean, oftentimes we go into a scene with only some of the blanks filled. I'm thinking in particular of the scene when Hortense first goes to the agency that helps adopted individuals track down their biological parents. Nothing is explained to us about what this meeting is or who this person is, and you kind of have to glean it about halfway through the scene. Oh, she's adopted and she's trying to find her mother. Oh, okay, I see. But that's so valuable. It's not just a trick. It really draws me into focusing on other aspects of what's going on in this interaction. Yes, I'm trying to glean information so that I can place myself in the plot and know what's happening. But it draws my attention to just how, for instance, fleshed out this adoption agent character,
who
government
appears
worker
in this one scene and is amazing.
It's an amazing scene, yes, and she does an incredible job. But she's also sort of sussing out Hortense, trying to understand her motivations. She's asking her questions, but she's also obviously very busy. She's preoccupied with other things, and it's so rich, this character and this scene that we have with her. And I'm really bought into it all the more because I'm also just trying to figure out what's going on. Who is this? Where are we? And there's a lot of examples of that throughout the film where there are deliberate question marks that are left for us to contemplate. What's going on between Morris and his wife? Why don't they have any children? Yes, what's going on with Roxanne and what's going on with her boyfriend? You know, we're first introduced to him. It's clear that they had some sort of a spat. They're making up. No explanation given, you know?
Right.
But it doesn't need to be given. In fact, in many ways, it's probably better that it's not given. In some ways, I think I'm thinking about who was it? Eisenstein, who talked about the power of montage and how it forces the viewer to sort of participate in the creation of the image and the moving things forward and the relationships among images. Well, I think that sort of narratively there's something going on there too. When certain information is just withheld, I, as an audience, am sort of constructing it and kind of giving it the best possible answer for me, right? The thing that is going to hook me in the most is what I'm thinking about. So I think it's a good tactic.
Yeah. I was also thinking about the character of Morris and how he's a photographer. And there are these scenes in the film where you see him photographing a couple and then a wedding and then something. And it just kind of goes from one to the next to the next. And, you know, obviously it's meant to give us a sense of like the day in the life of a photographer and that sort of thing. But it also kind of goes a little deeper, I think, because it's sort of, I don't know, like, what is Morris thinking about this world that he's living in, looking at these people all the time, especially going to weddings and seeing babies and, like, you know, all these different things that he's interacting with day in and day out and sort of looking back into himself. And there are these little flashes where he a little bit comes out, like when he's talking to Cynthia, when he kind of goes to see her unannounced. But it really isn't until the very end of the movie that he has this catharsis moment where he lets all this stuff out that he's really had to keep in order to keep his marriage going and, you know, whatever that may be. And I just think that just creates this just rich, you know, this rich view.
It's kind of interesting too when we get the guy that Morris bought his photography business from. That's kind of one of the big question marks for me, is like, I wonder why that was included. You know, what are we? Morris is clearly an object of jealousy. His family is an object of jealousy from multiple angles, because they have this nice house and they're clearly in a slightly higher class than Cynthia is now, even though he's her brother. And she is jealous of that. And then, you know, we've got this guy who has down on his luck and is now kind of jealous of Morris's success with what used to be his business. So there's kind of a similarity there, I guess. But it's also this kind of, it's like a slightly mysterious scene of this character who just enters and exits the film in this one scene.
I think that's a really significant scene. That, for one thing, that scene begins with Morris photographing a woman who has had her face disfigured, right? And so she comes out, you know, she's very self-conscious about it. She doesn't want Morris to kind of do his usual shtick where he sort of, you know, moves her hair out of the way and kind of gets her to smile or whatever. I mean, he's taking these serious pictures that are going to be used like in a court, you know, so that she can try and sue someone or get insurance money or whatever it may be. And so this woman leaves the office. And Morris and his assistant both sort of comment on, gosh, you know, poor thing, that kind of thing. She passes right by this guy, Stuart, who's this sort of drunk, down on his luck photographer that Morris has bought his business from. Then Stuart comes in. And, well, actually, before Stuart comes in, Monica comes in, who is Morris's wife. In a scene just before this one, he has said to his wife something like, you know, you've really drawn the short straw. He says this to his wife because she has these terrible pains and it's been impossible for her to conceive a child. And then the same thing kind of plays out again in this scene in the photography shop, where I believe Morris says at the end of the scene, when the disfigured woman leaves and then Stuart leaves again, he says, there but for the grace of God go I. So I think that there is this sense that, I don't know if it's exactly that Mike Leigh is sort of trying to lay the groundwork there, where we want to understand the pain and the anguish that Morris and Monica are experiencing, like we want to experience the pain that all the characters in the film are experiencing. But ultimately, all the characters in the film, and maybe Morris and Monica most of all, they have a lot, and they've been given much, you know. And maybe just one more little point is that it might connect back to the very beginning of the film, where we're at the funeral, and what is the hymn but the hymn "How Great Thou Art," which is a kind of version of Psalm 8. It's sort of all about, you know, the providence of God and the goodness of God in all of creation. And you know, I'm not saying Mike Leigh was trying to make a film about grace per se, or about kind of God's goodness in difficulty and adversity, but I think that is not an unreasonable reading of the film.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the film can't help but be so much larger than Mike Leigh's, you know, particular interest or whatever motivated the first approach to this subject, because of how humbly he's approached it. You know, when one comes to a group of actors with, you know, a particular interest in adoption and family, and then from the ground up works to build out these characters, these relationships, with a commitment to, you know, honoring them, you know, rendering them and the complexities of these circumstances the most truthful way possible, then you can't help but have so much more accrue to the film. And so it's you know, it's just remarkable that the whole film, basically from beginning to end, is just people talking. You know, it's not that there isn't some actions that happen, but they're slight. They're few and far between. You know, it's a film that really is not driven forward by particular actions that are performed, but it's the conversations that are had. And it also makes one nostalgic, not just for a particular attitude about storytelling, about the theater, I might add, because, you know, I think I saw in Mike Leigh's biography that he had directed some theatrical work.
Yeah.
And so just as an aside, you know, I think that so much of this film and of Mike Leigh's approach is a theatrical one. But what I was saying is that it makes one nostalgic also for a time before smartphones. It might be kind of trite to observe at this point, but it's just awesome seeing these people sitting together and just looking at each other in the face and just having long conversations and not right. checking the cell phone right. or heads down. It's really it feels somehow like yes, like that's a long gone age or something like that.
Yeah, and in as much as there is any action in the movie, it revolves around Hortense's quest.
Yes,
which could all be accomplished so much more easily now with the internet and a smartphone, right?
Oh, that's a good point.
In a sense, like that kind of takes away the what bit of kind of plot there is as she kind of uncovers more information about her birth mother or whatever. But yeah, I totally agree with you. That's why I love that. I love that era of cinema in general. But yeah, I mean, just that mid 90s to late 90s time, it doesn't feel to me anyway, and I'm a bit older than you guys, but it doesn't feel to me like a completely different world, but it is really. I mean, yeah. It's just not, we don't live the same way at all anymore like they do in that movie.
Yeah. Yeah, and when I first started acting and first took my very first acting classes, they had us read Stanislavski, Stella Adler. There was talk about the actor's studio and the method, and videos like Inside the Actor's Studio. Those interviews with James Lipton, and then I think about actors like Kevin Spacey or Pacino, or and yeah, I just don't know what happened exactly, because it's not as though like any of those names have fallen out of favor. I mean, names like Stanislavski or Stella Adler. But it does seem like there has been a real shift in the way plays are written and the way films are done. I remember the kinds of plays that I was reading, looking for scenes to work on in classes. I mean, this film, if I were teaching an acting class, I would absolutely recommend it to my students, and use it to pull out scenes. There's so much rich material in there for actors to work on, and so many kind of fundamentals that can be exercised by working on these scenes. But watching this film reminded me of so many of these plays that I had read or scenes that I had worked on in the past, and the sorts of dynamics that were present there that just don't seem to be so much the case anymore. I might be off, but this is just sort of a gut feeling.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a film from another era. It reminds me of some of the other films that I love from that similar time, and I think Secrets and Lies is better. But I mean, I love films like Richard Linklater's Before Sunrise. Where, I mean, they're wandering around a city, but they're basically just talking.
Right.
One of my favorite films of all time from 1980 is Louis Malle's My Dinner with Andre, which is, I mean, literally just two men having dinner. And in some respects, there are parts of Secrets and Lies that remind me of that film, because whether it's Hortense and Cynthia repeatedly, in a sense, like kind of growing their relationship over a series of a few sit-down encounters. The first one in the little kind of dingy cafe, and then they kind of take it up a notch where Hortense and Cynthia decide to go to a kind of slightly fancier Italian restaurant, and you see they're talking, but again, Mike Leigh isn't hitting us over the head with this, but we see Cynthia goes to the hairdresser. She wears slightly nicer clothes. It's like she's sort of becoming a better person, sort of by these conversations that she was at first terrified to have, and then gives herself over to have. And then the dilemma becomes, how does this become my new life? Like, how can this not just be, these interesting encounters with somebody, but in fact, how can I actually grow? For one thing, the family itself is going to grow by the inclusion of this person, and how do I bring her in? And and this is where we sort of get this this long scene of this barbecue, and we'll get to that probably if you want to talk more about that, but like where you see you see the character of Cynthia, who has seemed to almost calm down a little bit, feel a little more comfortable in her own skin. And then she's at her brother's house with Hortense, and it's like she's worse than ever. I mean, it's like she is like the rawest nerve ever. And then it all just kind of, flies out. Like she just can't keep it in, and she's just a mess, Yeah.
So I think it's kind of interesting. Another interesting point is the inclusion of these two family members in that scene, in the party scene, of Roxanne's boyfriend, who we truly know like basically nothing about. The employee, I forget her name. Morris is Jane.
Yeah.
Yeah. His employee is just invited to what's going to be an innocuous 21st birthday celebration, and then they both have to kind of like sit through this and feel awkward about it, but then like sort of put in their 2 cents at various times, and it feels like by being part of this moment, they're given this opportunity to learn something, or this opportunity to grow, and kind of like neither of them runs away from it, which is kind of interesting.
If I could, I would say I think there are 2 interesting reasons why those characters are included in the last sequence at the barbecue. One is that's the kind of thing that happens. I mean, I've been in weird situations before where it's like, I don't belong in the, like you're the outsider, right? And you're witnessing a family drama, and you're thinking, gosh, this is, I wish I wasn't here, or how did it end up that they're going to have this blow up right now when I happen to be standing in the room? So I think from like a realist perspective, I like that.
Totally.
The second is, I think both of those characters contribute something to our understanding of the other characters. The Jane character in particular, I was thinking about her. I was trying to think like, what is she about? Because she seems a bit flighty, she's just sort of doesn't seem to be a person of a whole lot of substance, But she makes this one really powerful comment right at the end when all this drama is taking place. She says to Morris, "I wish I had a dad like you, Morris." Which is so interesting because, of course, he's not going to be a dad. That's just not going to be in the cards for him. And yet we do, in that comment, realize that he has throughout his life exercised a certain paternal role. I mean, the way he interacts even with his clients and stuff, And
he's the one who wants to have this.
Yeah.
He wants to see his niece. He and his wife want to see. He took care of her when she was little. He was the younger brother, and he clearly has this. They clearly have this tenderness for each other. In fact, the most you see Roxanne smile in the movie all of a sudden is when she sees Morris and they're chatting and BSing with each other. It's quite a striking change in her demeanor when she gets together with him.
Yeah, completely agree. And then her boyfriend, Paul, he doesn't seem anything like Morris in terms of temperament or character or whatever, but and he doesn't seem to be, obviously they're not exactly living virtuously necessarily, but you do get the sense through various comments that Paul is not a bad guy. He's got a stable job. He seems to kind of have a decent head on his shoulders. And in fact, when they're sitting in the bus shelter and she does actually want to run away from the dinner, he does say to her something like, "I think you ought to go back in there." He makes one comment. There's something that kind of encourages her, right? And so I do wonder if like he's there as a kind of hope for Roxanne for the future, that maybe she could marry him and have a family, and she doesn't have to be a kind of loser, garbage picker-upper the rest of her life or something like that, that she can transcend the brokenness that she's been born into.
Yeah. And I to go off of what you were saying, Thomas, about Jane, or was it you, Andrew, whoever brought up that she has this kind of strange remark saying, "I wish you had been my father." It made me think of that scene with the down on his luck ex-owner of the studio, and how deftly Morris handles that situation with like, there's a certain grace and magnanimity, but then like a firm boundary. And you get the sense that Monica and Jane, who are both present to see that, are very grateful that Morris was there to handle that. And I think it's one of the times where you see Morris most fully sort of occupying this role of a father or the man, he comes off very well in that scene, like a real protector. So yeah, it's funny because a lot of these moments or characters that you don't think much of in the moment, or it's not super clear why they were included or what their role is, actually they wield like a significant impact on your understanding of the characters and just the feel that you have for them. And I think it's one of the reasons why the film is almost 2.5 hours long. You know, I think that many other films would get shaved down, and you could just see certain Hollywood execs being like, "Oh, we don't need this scene, or we don't need this character," or and what would be left with is something so much more reduced. But the sort of idiosyncrasy of some of these moments and interactions, they really go a long way to just deepening the whole thing.
Yeah. I think another example of that is the one scene where we see Hortense spending time with her friend. She, a lot of the time when we meet Hortense, she's answering the phone, reading a book. She's alone a lot, it seems like, and she's alone by choice. But there is this scene where she's having a meal with her friend, and it gives her the opportunity to talk just a little bit about memories of her adoptive family. And we get the sense, listening to this story, that Hortense has had a really nice life, that she had a lot of love in her life. Her parents weren't perfect. They didn't, they had their kind of traditional West Indian ways that aren't exactly the same ways as kind of late 20th century London. And maybe that's for the better. Maybe that actually created in Hortense a person of character or whatever. But it also gives the viewer the opportunity to kind of oversee this conversation that Hortense has with her friend about contraception, where they're sort of having a very mild, it isn't like watching Sex and the City or something, but they're having a kind of a forthright conversation with each other about being two single women, navigating the world of sleeping with men, and how does all of that work? And I think that's significant for the film, since of course, the existence of this person, Hortense, is predicated upon an unplanned pregnancy, essentially, right? Which is a very powerful thing, that this successful, attractive, articulate woman is sitting there in this house having a conversation with her friend when, years later, she wouldn't have existed at all, probably, as mores changed and technology changed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then there's a kind of parallel of that conversation that happens between Hortense and Cynthia when they're out at some kind of cocktail bar, buddying up. This is after Cynthia has done up her hair and gotten dressed nicely to go out. And now she's sitting there sipping a cocktail and having this kind of, it's like a reenactment of this kind of conversation that we saw Hortense have with her friend. Over,
and which we saw Cynthia have with Roxanne, a very upsetting conversation, right, where Cynthia's bothering Roxanne about her contraception methods, and Roxanne doesn't want to talk to her mom about this.
Interesting. Yes. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but it is in some ways like a synthesis of those two scenes. Whereas Roxanne, with Cynthia and Roxanne, it's the sort of nagging mom who's trying to, check in on her daughter and make sure that she's, thinking about everything. And then in the case of Hortense and her friend, it's very much, two young women kind of having a friendly conversation about what's going on in their lives. Here, it's almost like Cynthia's trying to perform both roles.
It's two girls out on the town kind of thing. Yeah,
and you see that tension in Cynthia throughout, because in that middle conversation where she's talking to her daughter, she is at first badgering her about her method of contraception, but then she says all of a sudden, if you had a little baby, it'd be okay, I'll take care of it. It's like she's got this cognitive dissonance, right? And that really comes through again in that third scene where she's talking to Hortense, where, what a bizarre thing for them to be talking about, contraception, because again, she's literally sitting across the table from from a life that wouldn't be there if she had been careful or used protection or whatever that may be, right? And sort of embedded in that, there's a little bit of a conversation about how Hortense's adoptive mother had been a midwife. And Cynthia says something like, "Oh, I would have liked to have been a midwife. I love babies." And then there's like a couple of beats of silence, and then she says, "Oh, I'm sorry." Like she gets it that like what what a bizarre kind of mismatch of things going on there.
Also, and tell me what you thought about this, but the scene where Hortense and Cynthia have their first meeting in the cafe, she's not understanding how she could possibly have a black daughter, and then suddenly a sort of a memory triggers. But she won't talk about it. She won't tell her who this guy was. She says, like, you don't want to know about that. And later she asks about it again. Was my father a nice man? And she says, don't break my heart. And so there's some implication that there's some traumatic experience, not necessarily a rape, but some kind of traumatic experience associated with this, aside from having to give up your baby. And so that's significant as well. I'm not saying that Mike Leigh has a Catholic view of human sexuality. You can see from the other movies he's made that that's clearly not the case. I'm not saying he's really making a critique of contraception, but it is interesting that the this woman who now is like the light in her life, Hortense, was potentially conceived in rape or by some kind of date rape or something just less than something untoward,
Yeah, and it's significant. Yeah, and it's significant too, I think, that she will tell Roxanne who her father is. And her father is an American, a medical student. I mean, somebody who obviously was very intelligent and, had his act together, except that he was, a real rascal and cad, by walking out, right? But what's the result of that union is Roxanne, who's this very unsuccessful, sad, depressed, difficult person. And yet what we have coming out of what clearly is something too awful to even talk about is the birth of this, capable, thoughtful, interesting person in the form of Hortense.
The person who seems to have it together in some ways more than anybody else in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem to reinforce the point that, like, some kind of point about human dignity, some kind of point about, like, every life really is precious. You just, I mean,
and just about the goodness of the institution of adoption.
Yeah.
Obviously these circumstances where children are put up for adoption are never ideal, but to not have that kind of avenue is worse, so it's like, it's a good thing that she was able to be adopted by a loving family and given the opportunities that she was given. And now she's a gift even to the people who had to give her up,
Yeah. But you definitely get a sense of, God writing straight with crooked lines in the way that this all plays out, which is, first of all, that she would have been less happy being raised by Cynthia than she would have with her own parents. And secondly, that she's now able to come and bring that sort of maturity and personal wholeness that she has and bring that as a gift to her biological family.
Yeah, and to be a real blessing to them. I mean, because it's, again, that's another one of those unexplained things. Like, what really happened between Cynthia and Morris and Monica and Roxanne? I mean, we get it in a general sense. Like, clearly Monica had a different view of the way she wanted to live her life, and she felt like, Cynthia was just, a very difficult person to try and interact with or whatever. But it's heartbreaking because clearly Monica also, not just Morris, but Monica also clearly has deep affection for Roxanne and misses her and feels a certain, love for her that has suffered because they haven't been in each other's company. Hortense comes into the picture and puts everybody back together again. And I think that's a beautiful image at the end of the possibility that this whole family can be closer because Hortense has decided to explore this question. And it's Morris actually who says to her something like, I admire you, Hortense, because you have desired the truth and you're not afraid of accepting the consequences of it.
Yeah. It's funny, that moment, and the moment immediately preceding it where Morris has this big explosion, that was like the one off note for me in the whole film. Specifically when he says the title of the film, Secrets and Lies, and then says, we all are in pain. Why can't we just share our pain or something? And somehow for a film that was so much about the subtext and what's happening underneath, it just struck me as like so dissonant to hear things said out loud, so clearly enunciated. I mean, even just the name of the film, So it's interesting. When I went back and looked at that scene again, I thought, well, what if those lines had just been taken out? And what if it was just, I've been trying so hard to make everybody happy, and the three people I love the most they hate each other's guts,
That would reveal as much about Morris's character still.
Right, that's what I'm saying is I think it still works, and yet Mike Leigh has chosen to really spell it out for us, in this moment, and seemingly this moment alone, what the takeaway is. And so much so as to even underline, yes, here is the title of the very film itself. I don't know, Andrew, do you have any thoughts about what's going on there?
I had not thought about that before, but I'm feeling somewhat convinced by your perspective there, James. It is a little bit unusually heavy-handed there, whereas the rest of the film is never like that. I do think that it's significant, though, that we already know that not all the secrets and lies are over with, right? I mean, we know that there are at least the secret of who Hortense's father remains. We presume there probably are other lies to unfold, so maybe there's something in that he's making this declaration and it all kind of comes exploding out. But as we think back on the movie, we're like, well, he said that, but I mean, it's not like that really was the catalyst for everybody just coming clean about everything.
No. But even this moment afterwards,
perhaps they took the title of the movie from the speech.
Maybe
putting the title of the movie in the speech.
But yeah, even this moment right afterwards where he goes to Hortense and says, I admire you. You're courageous because you sought the truth and were willing to suffer the consequences. Again, it just feels a little too on the nose.
Yeah.
Whereas, actually, one of the things that I like so much about this character of Hortense is that she's not, I think, presented as this sort of unambiguously pure-hearted, perfect protagonist. She's warned by the adoption agency not to do this on her own. Leave it to the professionals. There's a lot of trauma involved, and it's not just you have to think about. And you see how Hortense really does kind of, you could even say in a certain reckless manner, go about this.
You could argue that she shouldn't have accepted Cynthia's invitation to come to the party under the guise of just a friend from work.
Yes, but even before that, calling Cynthia at her home, taking her out, and the pain that she's putting Cynthia through in reliving a lot of these things, and it's you feel bad, and you can think of how badly these things can go. It's nice that they worked out, but to pursue the truth and not care about suffering the consequences, it's like, okay, what about the consequences that other people suffer? She had no idea that it would work out as nicely as it did. So I think that there's a sense in which she's a bit of a flawed character herself, even to the extent that she kind of facilitates this flight into fantasy for Cynthia for a period of time, where Cynthia is, perhaps reforming some of her behaviors, but in another very real way, putting on an act, kind of fantasizing about a relationship that she doesn't really quite have with this woman just yet. Part of the difficulty is how to reconcile what, begins to emerge as a kind of double life with who she really is and the family that she really has. Yeah,
that's right. And I think reckless is the right word for Hortense. And I think it's, I like this about what she's doing as a character, because clearly the painting that emerges of her is somebody who is not naturally very reckless. She's very careful. She's very methodical. But she does pursue getting to know her birth mother in a way that is kind of irresponsible. But at the same time, when you back up and think about the little interaction that she has with the adoption agency or the social worker woman or whoever that is, I felt myself wondering, I mean, are professionals going to do a better job of this somehow? What strategy are they going to employ to kind of make this easier for everybody? It's almost like it might make it harder because you're sort of not just getting it out there, And, Cynthia, for all of her many flaws, I mean, clearly she's somebody who can't, I think you're right, James, that she was in a sense trying to play pretend and like live into this different sort of person as she met her long lost daughter. But it doesn't last for long because she can't keep her emotions. She's always wearing her heart on her sleeve. I was thinking about the part when she picks up the phone for the first time and talks to Hortense, and she puts the phone down and runs to the sink and throws up. And I don't know. I just feel like there was something in that gesture that's kind of like her, just she can't fake anything. It's just going to come out. And that scene at the end, the kind of cathartic scene where she's quite reckless, frankly, in the way that she introduces the topic of the fact that Hortense is her daughter. But it's almost like she's throwing up, right? I mean, she's just like, she just lets it loose. And, I'm not saying that is always the best way to do things, but it might not be the worst way to do things.
Yeah, interesting. The music is amazing. The use of music in this film is super awesome.
Yeah.
And it's right from the beginning when we get this hymn. But then it's really woven throughout. Every scene is sort of led out and led into with, like very. It's almost talk about dissonance. You're in these like working class, London, almost like slums, this shabby apartment or whatever, and there's these beautiful strings coming in. It really works to elevate everything, the drama that's taking place. It gives it like a kind of nobility, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I watched another film by Leigh that's even more dingy and nasty and crusty, and you would have expected to have like a punk rock soundtrack, and it was clearly the same composer, a more like sort of slightly darker, more ominous sound, but like the same kind of instrumentation, the same essential vibe. So it's kind of interesting that he chooses to go with that. I don't know the name of the composer.
Yeah, his name is Andrew Dixon, and he composed, I think he did scores for most of Mike Leigh's movies, at least kind of the later part of his career.
I see.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of there's horns, there's strings, there's harp. I think in the score. It's very somber. It is elevating. I agree with that. It takes this sort of working class movie, and it certainly does propose itself as kind of a piece of art with the musical score. The use of music is one of those big questions for realist cinema. I'm a big fan of the Dardenne brothers, the Belgian filmmakers, and they never use music in their films at all. Right. And they don't, unless it just happens to be like playing in the car, or I don't know. There are technical terms for these things. I probably have written them, but I can't.
Is it diegetic music?
Diegetic, I think that's right. Yeah. So. But then there are other sort of realist filmmakers like Mike Leigh who do use music, and that's a very particular choice. I think it's very, very memorable in Secrets and Lies. To me, it really helps. Music always does this for me, but it helps me remember the scenes better. The whole movie sticks in my mind better because of the music.
Yeah, and I think it also helps with the way that the movie drives forward. Again, I've said it 2 or 3 times already, but it just doesn't feel like a 2.5 hour long film. And I think that part of that is owing to the way the film is crafted. It has a very nice pacing, and the way that the music takes us in and out of these scenes, the way that it's employed in particular moments, really goes a long way to helping with that.
Yeah.
I read an article in First Things a couple issues ago called Indigenous London, I think is what it was called. But it was all about sort of the big demographic shifts that have occurred in London over the past several decades, specifically with respect to the sort of indigenous working class, the Cockney British, who for the most part have left London for the sort of outer suburb areas, to have been replaced mostly by immigrant populations. And this was in part driven by particular policies that were adopted by the British government over the years, favoring immigrant populations over those who had really been indigenous to London for generations. And one of the things that I appreciated about the article was this sort of discussion of Cockney and of Cockney culture and it really is a cultural identity. And so that was something that I couldn't help but think about watching this film, that I think that there not that this is forefront in Mike Leigh's mind, perhaps, but there is a kind of comment about how London is changing, because this is a Cockney family, and I think Cynthia and Roxanne, where they're living, it's you can imagine probably that they're not living there anymore in London today. There is not this working class neighborhood for Cockney British anymore, and somehow Hortense, because of her adopted family, represents this changing landscape. I don't know if you have any thoughts, Andrew, about that side of the film.
Yeah, I think that is interesting, and there's a statement there for sure. I mean, I think one thing that's really interesting is that Cynthia and Roxanne live in their family home. That it was the home of her parents. That's the home where she grew up and where Morris grew up. So there is a sense, and significantly, the house is literally falling down. There's a scene where Morris comes and inspects the wall. The wall is falling down or something like that. Now, it seems that they don't own it, because he does mention something about, is the rent paid up or something like that, right? So I guess, it's a second generation or into the third generation of rent payers in this particular house. But it still seems significant to me that they're kind of a Cockney family staying for the time being, where they have been. Yeah. But
Morris's home he's only had for a year.
Right. And it's not totally clear to me. I probably could look this up. He clearly lives a little further out. I don't think he lives all the way out in Hertfordshire or Bedfordshire, somewhere where a lot of the kind of old Cockneys have moved. I think it's still probably somewhere in the greater London area, but it's clearly further out than where the others live. And I think it's significant that it's a brand new home. It has all these bathrooms in it. I don't know if you noticed the bathroom in the original home, the home where Cynthia and Roxanne lives, appears to be some kind of almost like an outhouse.
That's right. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's right in the middle of London, right? It's an attached house that has an outhouse, whereas Morris and Monica have kind of done well for themselves, and they've built a house further out that has 5 bathrooms and a little garden to sit in, and that kind of a thing. So I think there's a statement there. Yeah.
But it was an interesting article, and I think that anybody who's watching this film, I think I would recommend it, but also just to think about this people, like in some ways I just felt so sad, not just for Cynthia, obviously, and her family, but for like the loss of this cultural cohesion.
You do get to enjoy their language. It's something like it's gritty and lower class, but there's also like a strange eloquence to some of the expressions that they use. You know.
So yeah, that's changed for sure. London isn't really like that anymore, and those characters are a thing of the past. So I think in some respects, 1996. That was still just hanging on, and so it's like a time capsule to open that up.
Yeah,
great.
Anyway, anything else that we should say about this film?
There's one more thing I would just say, and we've talked a lot about the final scene, but it really just bears just talking about briefly about the significance of that scene. So the movie, you get to I think it's about an hour and 45 minutes mark, and then it transitions to a 35-minute sequence where that all takes place in the context of this birthday party for Roxanne, where the whole kind of reveal takes place. And I read that they filmed everything but that last scene. They stopped, and then they rehearsed for 10 days and then shot basically the last 30, 35 minutes of the movie. For my money, I just, I probably could come up with something eventually, but I don't think there is a movie that I know as well as Secrets and Lies that has such a powerful kind of build up climax like that has that kind of, that long final act that just kind of hits you so hard in several different places over the span of 30, 35 minutes, where again, both of you, I think, have said, and I've said, it's a long movie, and that is a really long sequence, and yet
Right.
you're totally gripped. There's no way you could turn that off if you just happened to be flipping along and encountered it.
I was surprised to see how much of the film it actually was when I was going back and rewatching certain sections. I was like, wow, this is a big chunk of the movie, big chunk of a long movie. Yeah. No, it does. It almost feels, well, I had used the term theatrical before, but it does feel like the big third act, where everything happens, where everything is revealed,
And, he takes his time with it. So you get this one scene where not much overt drama plays out, where they're actually having the barbecue and sitting out in the backyard and just chatting and overlapping with each other, and people are moving back and forth and getting food, and it's just setting up what is essentially like a perfectly typical family barbecue, with
I don't know if you noticed. I don't know if you noticed. It's kind of subtle, but so they're sitting out in the sunshine, and he's hoisting these big steaks, and they're all drinking, and it's pretty jolly. It really is. But then they're suddenly in the house, and if you look closely, it's because it's raining. So the rain has come, driving them inside, and then that's the catalyst for this this drama to like really, for the powder keg to really explode.
Yeah, no, it is. It's almost like Greek somehow. It just feels like very portentous, Yeah. This is another example of one of these very long shots that we get where it doesn't cut away and everything is orchestrated very tightly, but so much is still going on. I think it's another kind of textbook example of a kind of style of acting where even the business that's performed is expressive. I mean, I remember sort of, this being one of the first things I learned as an actor, like, oh yeah, you're having trouble with a monologue? Well, just pick an activity to do while you deliver the monologue. And then all of a sudden, so many things open up.
Yeah.
The same is true here. It's like, yes, on the surface, there's this very easy or quaint family barbecue going on, but in these actions that are performed, there's something communicated, something expressed, and we're all on the edge of our seat anyway, because I mean, even before the plan to go to the barbecue,
I mean, something, it's just something's going to happen when because it's obviously they're not even really trying to present a false narrative. I'll just say one more thing about Morris in that last sequence. I mean, I'm just imagining, leading up to his kind of explosion, just imagining what he was going through going into that event. And that scene where they're outside and he's playing the grill master, he's laughing. I mean, you have to kind of see him there in that scene as thinking, thank God this is going well.
Right.
This is going, everybody's having a good time. He's playing this part, very gregarious or whatever. And then it starts raining and they come inside.
Yeah.
And, but I mean, I think it's great because the Monica character, I think we get such a good payoff with her as well. I mean, the whole movie, she is just this, oh my gosh. I mean, you do pity her, but she's also just so difficult. And you can you see the difficulty of that marriage, and you do sort of see almost what Cynthia's like getting at, like, how can he be married to a woman like that? And yet there is something precious about her underneath that is really buried under so much hurt. And that scene, it almost makes me emotional even to say it, but that scene right at the end when she's bursting into tears, Monica is, and it's Cynthia who comes over to console her, and then Hortense, it's really wonderful. And I think not sentimental. I honestly think really that it's real serious, good storytelling with a good payoff.
I agree. I think that probably more cynical viewers, especially nowadays, might watch this and describe it as sentimental, but I don't think so. I think it's very truthful. And it's again, a good Thanksgiving watch, a good watch for going into the holidays. Because in so many ways it has to do with the sort of the rough edges of being in a family,
Mm-hmm. Andrew, thank you so much for coming on again to discuss this movie with us.
Thanks for having me, guys. This is good fun.
Criteria is a production of CatholicCulture.org. Check out our other podcasts, including Way of the Fathers, an early church history podcast hosted by Jim Papandrea, Catholic Culture audiobooks bringing to life classic Catholic writings, and the Catholic Culture Podcast, an interview show exploring Catholic arts, culture, and issues. You'll find all of this, as well as Catholic news, commentary, liturgical resources, and much more at CatholicCulture.org.